In Los Angeles, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Tesla finally begins building its $5 billion factory in China, which will shield it against import tariffs. But will it really keep the car maker protected from the ongoing trade war? Plus, Palantir is undergoing a makeover. Why the startup overhauled its business model in Europe and changed its hiring strategy as a potential IPO nears. And the Consumer Electronics Show gets into full swing. We will discuss what trends to look out for, from 5G to autonomous driving. But first, to our top story, Tesla breaking ground on its first plant outside the United States. CEO Elon Musk was in Shanghai for the ceremony to get construction started on its $5 billion factory. Here to tell us more, we go to Bloomberg's Dana Hull in San Francisco. So, Dana, they didn't break ground in the traditional sense, but they are kicking off a new timeline here. You know, what is the timeline for this factory to come to fruition in China?
Well, it's very aggressive. I mean, they want to build this factory in 2019 and have Model 3 production by the end of the year. And, you know, you have to remember that Tesla's Fremont plant was a plant that they bought from GM and Toyota, the former NUMMI plant. This Shanghai facility is a muddy field at the moment, so they're literally starting from zero in terms of construction.
What will a China plant mean for Tesla's business? I mean, will this really protect the company from political machinations?
I mean, certainly that's the hope. It's significant because China is the world's largest auto market. Having sort of cooperation with the Chinese government, both, you know, in the local provinces and the national government, is a big boon for Tesla. They obviously want to insulate themselves from import tariffs. And it's just cheaper for Tesla to produce locally for that market than to make the cars here in the United States and pay the cost of shipping them overseas.
Now, meantime, the company is, you know, hitting more milestones, made its 500,000th car at the end of last year?
Cumulative, yes. Mm-hmm.
So, you know, talk to us about what Tesla is on track to accomplish this year. You know, this is a company that's now generating more revenue than the Model 3, at least generating more revenue than any other sedan.
In the U.S., yeah. So the Model 3 is a very popular car. Consumers seem to like it. Tesla is going to have to spend more money on servicing those vehicles as service issues crop up and on expanding its supercharger network. The company has debt coming due March 1st. And then there's a lot of rumors about Tesla unveiling the Model Y, which is its next crossover vehicle sometime this spring. So, you know, 2018 was a really pivotal year for the company. You're going to see more of that in 2019 as they continue to mature and gain market share.
Now, Elon Musk did tweet, a few tidbits about what cars would be produced in China versus in the United States. He said that, affordable cars, certain models need to be made on the same content as customers. What is the strategy here?
The strategy is to save money by shipping. So the idea is to produce cars for the local market at the factory in that market. So first up is China. They've also talked about building a factory in Europe, and it doesn't make sense to make cars in California and ship them from here when you could have a local facility do the same.
All right. Well, certainly a big milestone for Tesla, and I know you'll be charting the progress. Dana Hull for us in San Francisco. Dana, thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Well, this week's U.S.-China trade talks were supposed to be low level, but Bloomberg has learned that Chinese Vice Premier Liu has made a surprise visit to the meetings. For more, I want to get to Washington and Sarah McGregor, who leads Bloomberg's U.S. economic policy coverage. And Sarah, Vice Premier Liu is actually one of President Xi's top economic advisors. So what does this signal?
I think broadly it signals his participation in the meeting unexpectedly, that China really is putting emphasis on these talks. It's taking the negotiations seriously. And I think just, him showing up, even if it was to give a wave and a friendly greeting, is a goodwill gesture on China's part. But it really doesn't negate the fact that there's a lot of hard work on the substance of a deal to be done. And right now, it's these lower level officials from both the U.S. and China in Beijing. They'll meet again on Tuesday. And they're trying to make some progress. progress. We heard from Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross today that he thinks, they might be able to get some deals through on maybe agriculture purchases from China, LNG, but it's those tough issues, intellectual property practices by China, greater access for American companies in the Chinese market that are really going to be the tough ones to achieve.
Now, we got some big news from Apple last week about cutting their revenue forecast, seeing, they're blaming it on dynamics in China. We don't know how much of it has to do with the trade war specifically, how much of it has to do with a slowing smartphone market more broadly. But is there any indication about how, big bombshell news like that for a U.S. company that has a big business in China, whether that impacts these talks or puts any additional pressure on either side?
This is a complicated piece of the puzzle in these talks for the U.S. You were just talking about Tesla breaking ground on a Chinese plant. Again, Apple lowered its revenue forecast for the first quarter, seeing these slower iPhone sales in China. So you can see that, first of all, just the impact of these trade tensions, they're really sending a bit of a chill in the business community amongst consumers. And secondly, there are U.S. companies operating in China. So if there's a slowdown in China, it's going to affect these companies themselves directly. So I think, there's a lot for the Trump administration to think over as these negotiations go forward. And as it decides how robust of a deal it needs to have, does it need to have on March 1st, which is this tariff escalation deadline, does it need to have secure promises on IP practices in China, which would be a really big issue to tackle? Or can it move forward with some deals to reduce the trade deficit, for instance, and work towards the larger goals?
Now, we're marching towards a March deadline here. What sort of tangible progress are we actually expecting from these talks this week?
So the talks this week, again, they're lower-level officials. I think they'll probably set the stage for what we're expecting to be a meeting between the U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Liu He in Washington, potentially as early as next week. Of course, that's not been officially announced, but that's what we're hearing from sources is the goal. We're about halfway through this period towards the March 1st, the 90-day deadline for the tariff escalation. So we're really going to have to try and, see some progress going forward so that there's a deal that can be put on Trump's desk that he can say yes or no to.
Now, the White House has certainly expressed a lot of confidence about the U.S.'s position here. I mean, is there any indication about whose favor the talks are swinging in? I mean, I know it could be a matter of perception, but have you seen any cracks in the confidence on the American side?
I think right now both sides are really playing down either of their economic situations. Both countries are seeing a little bit of weakness in their economies. China probably a bit more than the U.S. right now, and also stock market fluctuations. We see in the U.S. the stock market rise and fall on the perception of what's happening in these trade talks. So it does back both parties a bit more into a corner than they were even on December 1st or when this trade war started in July with the U.S. putting the first tariffs in place. And I think that puts them both in a bit more of a precarious position. Of course, both sides are saying we're going to get the best deal for our countries. We will not cave. Our economies are doing great. So, but the data's sort of, as more and more data points come out, whether it be manufacturing or whatnot, we're seeing that the reality is that there looks to be some weakness that will definitely play into their hands.
Meantime, the U.S. government still shut down. Will that impact the pace of progress at all?
Really the one way that we've sort of seen tangibly right now the government shutdown affect these talks is that data isn't coming out, for instance, trade data. So we're not getting those latest figures to assess the impact of the tariffs so far, from every corner that we normally get it from. But so far, the departments that deal with this have not been affected, nor the collection of tariffs. Of course, the longer this goes on, I guess more variables will be thrown into that. But right now, that's sort of the one area, the data collection that we've seen that's been the most notable in the U.S.
All right. Meantime, 800,000 government workers still not getting paid. Bloomberg's Sarah McGregor, thank you so much. Coming up, despite the current market turmoil, investors continue to see the silver lining in biotech. We go to the J.P. Morgan Healthcare Conference in San Francisco next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. biggest names in biotech and healthcare are gathering at the annual J.P. Morgan Healthcare Conference in San Francisco to set the agenda for the year. Bloomberg's Taylor Riggs is at the conference and joins us now. Taylor, give us the lay of the land.
Yeah, I'm here with the CEO of 10x Genomics, that's Serge Saxonov. Serge, thanks for joining us. Sort of for our Bloomberg Technology audience, lay out what 10x is and what you're hoping to achieve here at the J.P. Morgan Healthcare Conference.
Yes, so our premise, the reason we founded the company, is kind of this belief that this is the century of biology. Coming decades are going to bring transformational changes in terms of ability to cure cancer, address infectious diseases, bring health to old age. But the big thing, the big obstacle, is just how little underlying science, underlying biology we actually know. Biology is really complex, and we currently can only see maybe 5, maybe 10% of that, of what we need to see. And our goal is to become really good at building tools, applications, capabilities to allow the world to see biology it could not see before, see it at the right level of resolution, at the right scale. We combine hardware, software, chemistry, biology, inventions, innovations across all of those areas to build the products that we bring to customers.
So far the numbers look good. You came out with revenue numbers this morning. You're up about double, I think, year over year. What's driving that top line revenue growth?
So it's both. Our existing applications are just getting more and more adoptions with our customers. They're making discoveries that just were not even conceivable only a few years ago. And we're adding more products, more capabilities so that our customers, scientists, academic scientists, pharmaceutical scientists can now see biology they could not see before. So, and last year has just been tremendous progress across every front.
You also had some other news that you came out with as well, big news day for you, on new fundraising. You've now gotten an additional inflow of about $35 million. Where do you see the future growth opportunities in terms of deploying that capital?
Yeah, so last year was a tremendous year. We launched 6 new products. We expanded into multiple geographies. We increased the size of the team. And the goal is, and this is where we're going to be using this funding, is to keep accelerating that growth, to keep investing in R&D, to keep investing in scaling our commercial organizations. There's much more growth ahead. Big investments we're making across Asia. And just about every other geography around the world.
Like you said, R&D is expensive. I mean, how much more fundraising do you see? I think you're currently valued at about a $1.3 billion valuation. How much more fundraising do you see in the next few years?
So really, we're not in need of capital. The business is actually scaling really well. We don't foresee any need in the near future for more capital. Our goal is to keep investing in R&D and keep scaling the business.
In terms of investing in R&D, you also need to launch products. What's your pipeline for this year or the coming years for new products in terms of scaling, like you said?
Yeah, so this past year, we significantly expanded the range of our products, both in terms of the number, 6 new launches covering epigenetics, protein markers, immune system. And so our goal is to keep investing in those areas, and we also pointed out some new areas that we now are investing from building on top of the acquisitions we made earlier last year and entering the area of spatial analysis.
Yeah, what are some of those new areas?
Right, so in particular, the really fascinating next frontier of biology, where we have now delivered this ability to do analysis at the single cell level, and that's revolutionizing many different fields of our understanding of the fundamentals of biology. The next thing that we see the world is asking for is being able to tell where the biology is happening, where these cells are in the tissue, whether they're inside, when you have immune cells, whether they're inside the tumor or outside the tumor. So that question of where refers to the spatial analysis and will enable all kinds of new discoveries, new treatments, new diagnostics.
So much of when we think about venture capital or private fundraising then has to be an eventual exit strategy. I know it's early days. How much of your time is also spent on a potential IPO or another merger or a buyout? What would be your ideal exit strategy and when?
Yeah, so we actually don't think in terms of exit strategies. Our goal is to build a very large company here, because it's clearly our goal is to build the tools and capabilities to accelerate the understanding of biology, and that entails building something very significant, and that's our goal. Along this way, we can imagine going public as a step along that process. But really, the focus is on building the business and keep scaling.
Do you have a timeline for that?
The goal is to keep building the company, and depending on how the markets perform and sort of our internal needs, we're going to keep assessing it throughout the year.
We also talk about expanding regionally and geographically. You're headquartered in Pleasanton. You've opened up some new areas in Sweden and Shanghai. Where do you see geographically new areas for growth?
Yeah, so I mean, we are going to be growing all across the world, partially a function of where our customers are and also where the talent is. That's always a big driver for us. But a particular area where I think there's a lot of potential that we have yet to tap is Asia. And so we've already started making significant investments in 2018, and that's going to accelerate going into next year.
Just one last question here as we're at the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. What's been your key takeaway? What have some have been the biggest conversations you've had? What are people most interested in when you speak to them in the hallways here?
So the conference is just starting off, and I'm actually looking forward to learning what happens over the next several days. It's always exciting to be here because you do get a gestalt of what's happening. So we will see. I'm actually open, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the conference.
Thank you. That was 10x Genomics CEO Serge Saxonov here at the JP Morgan Conference.
Taylor, thank you so much. Taylor Riggs there for us in San Francisco. All right, coming up, highly secretive and contrarian data mining company Palantir is going a bit more mainstream. How the company is evolving ahead of a possible 2019 IPO next. I'm Bloomberg Tech live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology and follow our global breaking news network TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Peter Thiel's data mining company, Palantir, has always been a bit of a mystery. In 15 years, it has never hired a sales team, and it has focused mainly on big-budget government work. But now, ahead of a 2019 IPO, it is taking cues from more traditional tech companies. In recent months, the company has brought on dozens of sales staff, hiring top salespeople from Oracle and IBM. It is a big departure for a company whose CEO once said the only way he'd hire a sales team was if he was hit by a bus. The company is also said to be pouring resources into its corporate product foundry, shifting its focus beyond the secretive government work it's built its reputation on. Here to discuss the evolution, Bloomberg's Lizette Chapman. So, Lizette, Alex Karp hasn't been hit by a bus, thankfully. So why is Palantir hiring salespeople?
Two reasons. Number one, they're finally positioned to because they actually have something they can sell to the commercial market. And then the second reason is motivation. They've been private, as you mentioned, for 15 years, but the pressure has been increasing for them to IPO, something that could happen as early as this year.
So what do we know about the timeline and the status of a potential public offering?
Well, we've reported, according to our sources, that it could happen as early as this year. It could also happen in 2020. It kind of is something of a parlor game here in Silicon Valley, and I'm sure also on Wall Street, where many are looking to get this listing. We've reported Morgan Stanley is fortifying its connections with Palantir, as is Credit Suisse. But we don't know an exact timeline. We do know that there is some increasing pressure from investors, and since this is a very tightly held company, it was co-founded by Peter Thiel 15 years ago, the normal pressures, or many of the traditional pressures from a large cap table with a lot of heavy muscle investors with different timelines and agendas, isn't coming to bear because it is so tightly held by a very small group of people.
And talk to us about the valuation. I mean, this is a company that's where the valuation or projected valuation has fluctuated wildly.
It really has. The last time it was the last time that it was valued by private investors at $20 billion was back in 2015. Since then, though, there's been no public filings showing anything other than a huge discrepancy between what even what one group within Morgan Stanley valued them at, which is their mutual funds group. They valued them at $4.1 billion, so that's a huge drop from that $20 billion in 2015, and that was as recent as just late last year. Meanwhile, Morgan Stanley's IPO investment banking group, they put something out saying that they could see an IPO valuing them as much as $41 billion. So, you know, as we've reported before in the past, this is a huge gap. So to answer your question, it's not exactly clear how much they're worth.
Right. Now, Morgan Stanley, you mentioned, trying to build their bridges with Palantir as a banker, but they're also one of Palantir's biggest corporate clients, as you report, along with Merck, along with Fiat. What are these companies using Palantir for?
All of these companies are using it to pull disparate chunks of data, either siloed or on legacy systems, or real-time updating data and pulling it together, mining it for meaning to make different decisions about how to best run their businesses. For example, in Chrysler Fiat, one of their more recent customers to use Foundry, they're using it to do things like identify tiny fixes earlier in the manufacturing process that could save them money later by doing big fixes, like repairing one widget that costs maybe a couple of cents, as opposed to something that if you wait maybe 6-7 months, it could cost a couple $1,000s. So finding that information.
How are the salespeople working out? I mean, is having a sales team working in terms of generating revenue?
Right. Well, it's too soon to say globally. Again, because it's a private company, they hold their finances tight to them. But in Europe, where they are required to disclose, we reviewed some documents that showed that it is paying off in Europe, and it's up significantly, up to 175 million for 2017. Which is the last filing that we were able to access. So it is paying off. But the larger question about culture is something that's still undetermined. It might be tricky to have the CEO and the leader of your company have one position for so long, saying that they're an engineering first, engineering only culture, and then bolt on a sales team after 15 years. That's tricky.
All right, Lizette Chapman, I know you're going to be charting the road to a potential IPO for us. Thanks so much. Coming up, we head to Las Vegas to get the latest on bold and buzzy new technology at the Consumer Electronics Show, and we'll hear from Qualcomm President Cristiano Amon about 5G, the ongoing patent dispute with Apple, and the potential impact of the U.S.-China trade war. This is Bloomberg. Technology. I'm Emily Chang in Los Angeles. Apple may not give keynotes at CES, but just ahead of the Electronics Expo, it announced a deal that until recently seemed unlikely. Apple will begin offering iTunes movies and TV shows on the programs and televisions of its rival Samsung. To discuss this and plenty more in the shifting digital media landscape, I want to get to Las Vegas, where MediaLink CEO Michael Kasson is standing by. He is the CEO of MediaLink, a strategic advisory firm specializing in digital disruption. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. So unlikely is one word, unthinkable is another. What do you make of this deal between Apple and Samsung?
Well, strange bedfellows. I think we were all in agreement about one thing. While for so many years we said it's about the content, and I still agree it's about the content, there seems to be an abundance of that. I think today we'd all agree it's about the distribution, and so finding, strange bedfellows or arguably frenemies that can work together in terms of distributing more content, I don't think is surprising. I think it's actually spot on.
Do you think Apple has a chance in original content, and if so, what are the chances?
It's hard to bet against Apple in anything they do. That being said, the two areas where I think they've been slower than people would have expected is in that home device. I mean, I know that Siri has existed for a long time, but the idea of Amazon and Google and Facebook having really come to market sooner than anybody would have expected, certainly well in advance of Apple with their device. That's number one. And number two, in content, while money is of, an object to everybody, it seems Apple has plenty of that. I'm surprised it's taken them as long to make those moves as it has. That being said, they certainly can catch up. We've seen networks on the linear and the cable side transform themselves on the back of one show. One only has to look at AMC and Mad Men and Breaking Bad to look at what one particular show can do, or even Amazon with The Marvelous Mrs. Maisels. While there's plenty of shows, those kinds of one-time wonders, if you will, can really drive adoption of the content offerings of different platforms. So you don't rule Apple out of anything.
Well, and perhaps this deal with Samsung is a signal that Apple is changing its hardware-first approach, and maybe it's not as important to get a home device in the home as it is to have certain partnerships, one of which is with Amazon. Since you mentioned The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, one of the winners at the Golden Globes, I do want to talk about the progress of Amazon and Netflix. We saw Alfonso Cuarón take home 2 awards for Roma, a big deal for Netflix as its first original movie winning an award. What do you make of that?
Look, I think content from wherever it comes today is the answer. Netflix is certainly spending enormous sums of money, as is Amazon, and so the likelihood of them having more winners in the award season, I think, is to be expected. They're, in the proverbial throwing more of it against the wall, that much more of it has an opportunity to stick. I'm certainly not referring to the content as that. I'm just using the analogy. And so I think you'll see more of that as opposed to less of that, as the marketplace really doesn't care who the producer is. They care how good the content is.
That said, does that mean that Netflix loses its edge in the future as more companies pull their content from Netflix and, develop their own OTT services?
Well, look, with Disney being as serious as they are in their mission, and with the Fox deal ready to close, momentarily, obviously, within the next few weeks is what the expectation is. What Disney is doing under the leadership of Kevin Mayer, I think you can't underestimate that. And certainly Warner Media with John Stankey and Richard Plepler and the team, and Kevin Riley now moving over, not moving over, but taking on additional responsibility relative to the over-the-top creative mix. And let's not forget our friends in Philadelphia and 30 Rock with Comcast, NBC, Universal. I think the field is crowded, but as in all crowded fields, the cream's going to rise, and those who can create the best content and catch the attention of the viewers, and we'll talk about that for a moment in terms of catching the attention, I think that's who's going to win. And they're all capable of spending enormous sums of money to create content. Not that money ensures good content, but as I said, the more of it you produce, the more of it you create, the more of it you distribute, the higher likelihood of catching the attention of the audiences. When I talk about capturing the attention of the audiences, though, I think it's important to note the amount of money that is being spent on program promotion. We don't any longer, and haven't for quite some time, relied on lead-in, as network television used to refer to it. You just have to drive up and down any of the main thoroughfares anywhere in certainly Los Angeles, New York, and as well places all around the country, and see the amount of money being spent in one sector, particularly out of home, promoting rather the content on Netflix and Hulu and and the like. So the money's being spent to drive the eyeballs, and the eyeballs seem to be responding when the content is good.
Now, back to devices, since you're at CES, and back to Apple. Apple did put up a big ad on the side of the Marriott Hotel referencing its privacy. What happens on an iPhone stays on an iPhone. There's a URL for pointing to Apple's privacy policies. You know, despite this deal with Samsung, it's sort of a slap at Android competitors, at Facebook, at even Google. You know, what do you make of Apple really doubling down on this idea that they're on the right side of history when it comes to your data?
Well, I think Apple certainly is. I think Evan Spiegel's made it clear that Snapchat shares a similar view of, the utilization of users' data. I think this is an important conversation, and one that's going to play out very, very importantly over the next several months. And I think we're going to find a delicate balance, Emily, that talks about, government regulation, but as well good business practices. So it's a conversation that's going to be had. Consumers are paying more and more attention to it. I know it is generational. There are those who think certain generations couldn't care less about their information. Others do. But I think at the end of the day, it's knowledge and how we advise the consumer, and how these various platforms advise the consumer of what's actually happening with their data. It's incumbent upon the consumer to pay attention to that. Too many of us, I'll be checking into my hotel here in Las Vegas shortly, and when I go to get online, I'm going to say I agree. I'm not exactly sure what I've agreed to. And I think we all have to pay a little more attention to that fine print, or maybe it's the job of the platform to make that fine print a little larger so that we actually do understand where our data is being ported and how it's being monetized for somebody else.
You're going to be sitting down with AT&T's John Donovan, the CEO of AT&T Communications, a little bit later this week. What do you think the role of the telecoms should be in this privacy issue?
Well, again, anybody who is in control or in receipt of data around consumers owes the consumer that right to privacy that we all cherish. And I think the telecoms are as important in this conversation as the platforms. But again, I'm actually using terms that I don't generally let others get away with when we say platforms. These are all media companies in some way, shape, or form. And, no different than the same scrutiny that the traditional media companies, the broadcast companies were subject to. I think these, quote, platforms, close quote, need to be subject to the same scrutiny that traditional media companies were subjected to, number one. Number two, in my conversation on Wednesday at 2 o'clock with John Donovan, I'm very keen to hear the 5G plans. This is seemingly the year of 5G. I hearken back to something that'll make a few smile, I hope. Y2K, now 19 years ago, I had a guy who worked with us in the media business who used to say, gee, I don't know what all the noise about Y2K is. Y1K was easy. I don't know if that'll resonate with too many of your viewers, but what I will say is 5G is not just the next G. 5G is going to be a quantum leap in terms of the delivery of content and the speed with which you can access it, where you can access it. And as was pointed out by Randall Stevenson, and I'm certain John Donovan will talk about it as well, when you bring together a couple of things that are happening in our environment, one being autonomous driving and the other being 5G, and you look at that not just in, gee, my cell phone, my mobile phone's going to be faster, but look at all the time that people are now going to have for consumption of content. So I think the three play very well together. Autonomous driving on the one hand, content creation and consumption on the other, and content distribution as the third leg of that stool. I think as all of those things come together, it should make for a very interesting opportunity for the consumer.
MediaLink CEO Michael Kassan, we will have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us from CES. As Michael was saying, of course, 5G this year is expected to be a big one where we'll see 5G really gain traction. So what is Qualcomm's game plan to stay ahead of the competition? We spoke exclusively with Qualcomm President Cristiano Amon ahead of CES and asked about the company's strategy for the year.
2019 is, I will say, the most important year for 5G. It's the year that we're launching 5G. Like at CES, we just announced that we have over 30 devices launching with 5G in 2019. The absolute majority of it are smartphones. And you have to launch those devices to get the technology, to perform in the field. They had all the learnings, make sure the devices are very competitive. And we always said that fiscal 20 is where it becomes a very significant financial event. But what we see right now with all those launches of 5G in the early part of 19, we can predict that in the second half of this calendar year is that you're starting to see all of the major carriers across all the developed economies really changing their incentive mechanism and their channel towards getting to 5G net adds and start to execute on their business plan. So in the second half of 2019, you're going to start to see 5G ramping.
How worried are you about the impact of a U.S.-China trade war on the Chinese consumer and a pullback in general of the Chinese consumer, with a decrease in consumer confidence?
Look, you can look at this in multiple ways. One way to look into this is you have a big transition to 5G, and if you're a customer in China, and if you're an OEM in China, companies like Xiaomi, Vivo, Oppo, OnePlus, even Huawei, they're looking into this as a growth opportunity, not only within their domestic market to upgrade, but also outside China. And if you're concerned about growth in domestic China, that's where you actually accelerate your efforts to go outside. And I think we've seen this trend within the China, market dynamics. And as we look at the China scale in itself, if you look at China Mobile, they have more subscribers than probably the United States has in population.
Right. It's the biggest smartphone market in the world.
All that it needs is a carrier motivation to upgrade their customers to the next generation of wireless, change the incentive mechanism, and you have a big change in the market. And like I said earlier, we're betting on 5G because every signal we get from China, they're as excited about 5G as the United States is.
Okay, but 5G aside, you're also saying that you don't see a change in the Chinese consumer. You don't see a pullback in the Chinese consumer.
Look, as far as our business is concerned, since we're not really impacted, since we're not part of the new Apple phones, as far as our business, we can't really, we're not in a position right now to be providing financial guidance. But I'll say we're happy with China. China has been a very good story for Qualcomm, and we expect that to continue to be.
So Qualcomm dominates in smartphone components, but you've talked about laptops, you've talked about cars, you've talked about Internet of Things. In which of those categories are you seeing meaningful progress?
Okay, so as we get to CES right here, it's automotive is a big piece of Qualcomm expansion, and that's one of the area we have the most announcements at this show. And I'll say, when we were in January 2018, exactly 1 year ago, we had an automotive pipeline about $3 billion. We're announcing at this show that now, January 2019, that's equal to 5.5. We grew 2.5 billion of our pipeline in the past 12 months. And the announcement we have at CES, we're now taking the same approach we took in mobile to automotive.
Now, Qualcomm hasn't quite put its foot on the gas in the self-driving car space yet. Why is that?
We have been focused initially in the areas that we can bring the biggest impact to our mobile heritage. We focus on connected car, and I will say that virtually every connected car now is using Qualcomm technology. Then we went to the digital cockpit transformation, trying to solve a very simple problem. People are driving, they're looking at their smartphone, they shouldn't be doing that. Why not bring all the technology to the cockpit? And you see then us expanding into other areas into the future. We're not making any new product announcements, but I think we are now an automotive supplier, and we're in the automotive industry to stay.
Okay, so you are in the midst of a global patent showdown with Apple. We know that Apple has very deep pockets, can pay the legal bills of their suppliers, which are also in a dispute with Qualcomm as well. You have had big wins in Germany, in China. What makes you think that Qualcomm can prevail?
Look, we had said repeatedly that 2019 we expect this to be resolved one way or the other, and we're starting to see right now the legal milestones that we said we would see it in the beginning of 19, and it's a long process, but as we see those milestones right now, we're confident that 2019 we will get some form of a resolution. At the end of the day, we stand behind the value of our intellectual property. We believe, many of our intellectual property has been fundamental to enable companies to enter into the cell phone market. We having to build, years on R&D. It's an important portion of the Qualcomm business model, and we feel very confident, in our ability to be able to prevail with this. And we look at all of the excitement we have in other markets, the excitement about 5G, and with the entire mobile ecosystem, it is proven to be a healthy, element of the market, and we'll continue down that path. We're optimistic about it.
Qualcomm President Cristiano Amon. Coming up, officials in Seattle are giving a warning to New York City. Beware of Amazon. Why the tech giant is once again under scrutiny as it expands in the United States. This is Bloomberg. Amazon is facing more pushback on its expansion. 2 Seattle City Council members are urging officials in New York to hold the tech giant accountable as it moves forward with its HQ2 plans. Bloomberg's Spencer Soper covers Amazon. He joins us now from Seattle. And Spencer, these 2 Seattle lawmakers traveling to New York to express these concerns?
Yeah, that's what jumped out at us, too. It's not the kind of thing you see every day where a local official will make that long trek to give a warning about the biggest employer in their hometown. And so what you have here are 2 Seattle City Council members who are warning about things like essentially people getting squeezed out. So they're warning New York lawmakers to prepare for affordable housing, further affordable housing crunch, prepare for transit problems, even prepare for homelessness, and make sure that Amazon is paying its fair share to address those issues, not just promising jobs and getting a free ride.
Now, as I understand it, the deal is done. I mean, could the terms of the deal change as a result of these protests and pushback?
That's where it gets murky. There are some New York lawmakers, and let's think first about how this was structured. So Amazon negotiated directly with the governor of New York and New York City mayor, and so a lot of these other lawmakers who are now making noise were left out, and so they felt kind of blindsided by this thing. So now they're looking for any means necessary that they can slow it down, influence it. I don't think anyone seems to think that they're going to completely stop this thing. If anything, they might limit some of the funding that Amazon gets back from the state, or could they basically get some deal sweeteners from Amazon, get some assurances from Amazon put on the table. And the things that they can do, they can file lawsuits to slow it down. They can go to some of these appointed political bodies that still have to approve part of this process. There are some things along the way that they can do.
Some of the New York lawmakers pushing back: New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Representative Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. So, big names. But I know you'll keep us posted. Bloomberg Spencer Soper in Seattle. Thank you. Still ahead, grocery shopping is going digital. A look at Microsoft and Kroger's attempt to take on Amazon next. This is Bloomberg. Amazon, beware. Microsoft and Kroger are joining forces. The tech giant and America's biggest supermarket chain have remodeled 2 stores to test a series of new digital features. Joining us from Seattle to discuss, Bloomberg's Dina Bass, who visited one of the test locations. Dina, what was it like?
Sure. So, Emily, you basically walk in and you've got your shopping list on uploaded to their app, and you either use your phone or pick up one of their devices, and it'll start to tell you which aisle, what part of the aisle the items you're looking for are in. When you get to that exact item, if you look at the smart shelf below the item, there's a little icon that matches the icon you've picked, and it tells you here's your item. And you pick that up. It's also got a bunch of sensors to keep control of meat temperature. There are cameras which tell you whether things are missing on the stock shelves, and there's ads which can change based on a little camera in there that use the Microsoft software to guess whether you're a man or a woman and what your approximate age might be.
So what are Kroger and Microsoft actually trying to accomplish here? Is this all about taking on Amazon and Whole Foods?
Sure. Microsoft wants to take on Amazon on the cloud side. They want to sell more software than Amazon, which is the market leader by far. Kroger is worried, again, as you mentioned, about Whole Foods, and Amazon's also got these cashierless Go convenience stores. And so Amazon's basically primed customers to expect faster shopping. Kroger wants to speed up the shopping experience for the shopper, as well as for their own employees who are picking items to deliver to you curbside. And they want to be able to sell more advertising and more promotions that are personalized to particular users.
So, this kind of technology being integrated into real-world physical locations, it always sounds great. But the question is it going to work? Is it going to be efficient? Is it going to be buggy? Or is it going to be seamless? What's your sense?
I tried it out in a pretty controlled environment. It worked fine the way I saw it, but, that's why they're trying this first in these 2 pilot stores. They're going to see what works and what doesn't, and then the plan, according to Kroger, is to expand, the forms of this that work best to all of their stores. But you point out it's got to also, apart from working well, it's got to be integrated into a regular shopper's experience, or it's not really worth anything for them.
All right, Dina Bass for us in Seattle. Always appreciate you stopping by, Dina. Thanks so much. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology Tuesday. We will have much more from CES. Be sure to catch our interview with IBM CEO Ginny Rometty, Verizon CEO Hans Vestberg, Bob Pittman of iHeartMedia. That's all for now. From LA, I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg.